The morning started like any other Tuesday in our quiet suburban neighborhood of Willowbrook. My wife, Sarah, 7 months pregnant with our first child, had been experiencing those intense nesting instincts that seemed to hit her harder each passing day. She'd wake up at dawn, her energy surprisingly boundless despite carrying our growing baby, and throw herself into organizing, cleaning, and preparing our home for the little one's arrival. I'm Marcus Thompson, and I've been working as a senior waste management inspector for the city for the past 12 years. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays well, provides excellent benefits for my growing family, and gives me a sense of purpose knowing I'm keeping our community clean and safe. Most people don't realize how complex waste management actually is. There are dozens of regulations, environmental protocols, and safety standards that businesses and residential areas must follow. That particular Tuesday, I was dressed in my civilian clothes, planning to spend the morning helping Sarah sort through baby clothes and furniture we'd received from her baby shower the previous weekend. The inspection schedule had me starting later in the afternoon, covering a series of commercial properties downtown that had been flagged for potential violations. Sarah had been feeling restless lately, her doctor attributing it to normal third trimester energy fluctuations. She'd been organizing our garage, sorting items into donation boxes, and creating what she called perfectly categorized piles of everything from old electronics to outgrown clothes. Her attention to detail had always impressed me, but pregnancy had amplified this trait to almost scientific levels. "Marcus, I think I'll take these donation boxes to the community center this morning," she said, her hand instinctively resting on her rounded belly as she surveyed the neat stacks of items we'd organized. "Dr. Martinez said light activity is good for me, and I hate having all this clutter just sitting here." I glanced at the boxes. There were about 6 of them, each carefully labeled with Sarah's neat handwriting. "Want me to load them in the car for you?" I offered, already reaching for my keys. No, I can handle it," she insisted, that stubborn independence that I both admired and worried about shining through. "They're not that heavy, and I need to stop treating myself like I'm made of glass." The community center was only a 10-minute drive from our house, located in the newer part of Willowbrook, where the city had invested heavily in public spaces and environmental initiatives. It was a beautiful facility with solar panels, rain collection systems, and meticulously maintained recycling and waste disposal areas, something I'd actually inspected and approved during its construction phase. Sarah loaded the boxes into her SUV with careful precision, arranging them so nothing would shift during the drive. She'd been doing this kind of thoughtful preparation for everything lately, from organizing the nursery to meal prepping for after the baby arrived. Watching her prepare for motherhood with such dedication made me fall in love with her all over again. What neither of us anticipated was Karen Whitmore. Karen had moved into the neighborhood about 8 months ago, purchasing the large corner house that had been on the market for over a year. She was a woman in her early 50s, recently divorced with grown children who rarely visited. From the moment she'd arrived, she'd appointed herself as the unofficial neighborhood watch coordinator, though nobody had asked for or wanted her services. She had opinions about everything: lawn heights, parking positions, garbage can placements, and especially about the community center's policies. Karen seemed to believe that her property taxes gave her authority over public spaces, and she'd been particularly vocal about what she considered misuse of the community donation areas. When Sarah arrived at the community center that morning, she found the donation drop-off area busier than usual. A local church group was organizing a charity drive, and several families were contributing items. Sarah parked her SUV and began unloading her carefully organized boxes, taking her time to ensure she didn't strain herself. The donation area was clearly marked with large signs explaining the guidelines. Items should be clean, organized, and placed in designated areas during operating hours. Sarah had called ahead to confirm the center was accepting donations, and she'd followed all the posted guidelines to the letter. That's when Karen appeared. Karen had been driving by, or more likely patrolling the area as she did most mornings, when she spotted Sarah at the donation site. For reasons that would become clear later, Karen had developed a particular animosity toward the community center's donation program. She'd complained to the city council multiple times about excessive traffic and inappropriate dumping at the facility. Excuse me? Karen's voice cut through the peaceful morning air like a rusty blade. What exactly do you think you're doing? Sarah looked up from where she was carefully lifting a box of baby items they'd received duplicates of. I'm donating these things to the community center, she replied politely, though I could tell from her tone that she was already sensing something was off about this interaction. Donating? Karen's laugh was harsh and bitter. That's not donating. That's dumping. You people think you can just leave your junk anywhere and call it charity. Sarah's cheeks flushed, partly from the physical exertion and partly from the unexpected confrontation. I called ahead to make sure they were accepting donations today. These are all clean, organized items that... I don't care what you called ahead about, Karen interrupted, stepping closer. I've been monitoring this area, and I'm tired of people like you treating public spaces like your personal garbage dump. Other people in the donation area had started to notice the commotion. The church group members exchanged concerned glances, and a few families with children moved their cars further away from the brewing conflict. Sarah, ever the peacemaker, tried to de-escalate the situation. Ma'am, I understand your concern, but I'm following all the posted guidelines. These aren't garbage. They're quality items that other families could really use. Baby clothes, toys, books. Sarah's voice trailed off as she gestured to the open boxes, the contents clearly visible and meticulously organized. Karen's face had taken on an ugly red flush. Quality items. Quality items. Her voice rose to a near shout. You're 7 months, pregnant, and you're out here dumping your unwanted junk on the community. What kind of example are you setting? The comment about Sarah's pregnancy crossed a line. My wife had been dealing with subtle judgment and unsolicited advice from strangers throughout her pregnancy, but this was different. This was aggressive and personal in a way that made her take a step back. I'm sorry, but I don't think my pregnancy has anything to do with everything to do with it. Karen's voice had attracted the attention of everyone in the area now. Pregnant women should be home taking care of themselves, not out here creating public nuisances. Sarah's hands moved protectively to her belly, a gesture that had become instinctive over the past few months. Ma'am, I'm not creating any kind of nuisance. I'm simply donating items according to the center's guidelines. Guidelines? Karen stepped even closer, her face now inches from Sarah's. I'll show you guidelines. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, though it couldn't have taken more than a few seconds. Karen, in a moment of rage that seemed to surprise even herself, grabbed Sarah by the shoulders and pushed her backward. Sarah, off balance due to her pregnancy, and caught completely off guard by the physical contact, stumbled backward toward the large waste disposal area behind the donation site. The community center's waste management area was something I'd inspected personally during my official capacity. It contained several large dumpsters for different types of waste, recycling containers, and composting bins. The area was clean and well-maintained, but it was still a dumpster area, not a place where any person, let alone a pregnant woman, should ever end up. Sarah's momentum carried her backward, and she fell into the space between two large dumpsters. The impact wasn't severe. The area was designed with safety in mind and had rubberized surfaces, but the humiliation and shock of being physically pushed by a stranger left her stunned and shaken. Karen, shouted one of the church group members. A middle-aged woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, whom I'd later learn, had been documenting the entire incident with her phone. What is wrong with you? Karen seemed to realize what she'd done, but instead of apologizing or helping, she doubled down on her aggression. Maybe now she'll think twice before dumping her garbage in public spaces. Sarah, struggling to get up from between the dumpsters, was crying now, not from physical pain, but from the shock and humiliation of being attacked by a complete stranger. Several people rushed to help her, including Mrs. Rodriguez and 2 teenage volunteers from the church group. I'm calling the police, announced one of the fathers who'd been donating items with his family. This is assault. Assault? Karen's voice cracked with disbelief. I was protecting public property. She was illegally dumping. Mrs. Rodriguez, still filming, spoke clearly for the camera. Ma'am, she was following all posted guidelines and making legitimate donations. What you just did was completely unprovoked and dangerous. As Sarah was helped to her feet, she was visibly shaking, The baby was moving actively. Whether from stress or from the physical jolt, we'd never know. What Karen didn't realize as she sat in the police station that afternoon, filling out paperwork and trying to explain her actions to increasingly skeptical officers, was that attacking the wife of a senior city inspector had set in motion a series of events that would expose far more than just her poor understanding of waste management regulations. The next morning, I kissed Sarah goodbye as she settled into her favorite chair with a cup of herbal tea and a pregnancy book, still recovering from the emotional trauma of the previous day. Our family doctor had confirmed that both she and the baby were physically fine, but the stress had taken its toll. She'd barely slept, jumping at every sound outside our house. "I'll be back by lunch," I promised, adjusting my official city inspector uniform, the same uniform I rarely wore to neighborhood events, preferring to blend in as just another resident. Today, however, I wanted to be very clearly identifiable as a city official. My first stop wasn't Karen's house, though I knew exactly where she lived from the police report. Instead, I drove to City Hall to meet with my supervisor, Janet Morrison, the Director of Environmental Services. Janet had been with the city for over 20 years and had a reputation for being both fair and utterly thorough when it came to enforcement issues. "Marcus," she said, looking up from a stack of violation reports as I knocked on her office door. "I heard about what happened to Sarah yesterday. How is she?" "Physically fine, but shaken up." "Janet, we need to talk about this situation." I gave her a complete rundown of the incident, including Karen's claims about monitoring the community center and her stated belief that she was enforcing waste management regulations. Janet's expression grew more serious with each detail. "So this woman has been conducting unauthorized surveillance of a city facility and physically attacked a citizen based on her incorrect interpretation of municipal codes?" "That's exactly what happened. And here's what concerns me most. She said she'd been monitoring this area for weeks. She talked about people like Sarah, as if this wasn't an isolated incident." Janet pulled up her computer and began typing. "What's the woman's name and address?" "Karen Whitmore, 1247 Elm Ridge Court." Janet's fingers paused over the keyboard. "Wait, that address sounds familiar." She pulled up a different database and scrolled through several screens. "Marcus, we've received multiple complaints about that address over the past 6 months." My stomach tightened. "What kind of complaints?" "Let's see. Noise complaints about excessive arguing, reports of someone confronting residents about trash can placement, complaints about a woman photographing people's properties without permission." Janet's voice trailed off as she continued reading. "Oh, this is interesting. 3 separate reports of someone claiming to be a neighborhood environmental compliance coordinator and demanding access to private property for inspections." I felt a chill run down my spine. "She's been impersonating a city official?" "It looks like it. And Marcus, look at this." Janet turned her computer screen toward me. 2 complaints specifically mention a woman matching Karen Whitmore's description, harassing people at the community center donation area. One from last month, one from 3 weeks ago. The scope of Karen's behavior was becoming clear, and it was far worse than I'd initially realized. This wasn't just about an angry woman having a bad day. This was about someone who had been systematically harassing community members while pretending to have official authority. "Janet, I need to conduct a full investigation into this woman's activities. If she's been impersonating city officials and harassing residents based on false claims about municipal regulations, this is a serious public safety issue." "Agreed. I'm authorizing a comprehensive review of all complaints related to that address and that individual. And Marcus?" Janet's expression was grim. "Given that she physically attacked your wife, I want you to have backup on this investigation. I'm assigning Inspector Rodriguez to work with you." Carmen Rodriguez was one of our most experienced inspectors, known for her meticulous attention to detail and her ability to remain calm under pressure. If we were going to build a case against Karen, Carmen was exactly the partner I needed. An hour later, Carmen and I were parked outside Karen's house, reviewing the complaint files Janet had compiled. The picture they painted was disturbing. Karen had been presenting herself as some kind of unofficial environmental enforcement officer for months, confronting residents about everything from recycling bin placement to lawn maintenance. Marcus, look at this complaint from Mrs. Chen on Maple Street, Carmen said, pointing to one of the reports. She says a woman matching Karen's description told her she was violating city composting regulations and demanded to inspect her backyard. When Mrs. Chen refused, the woman took photographs of her property and said she'd be reporting the violations to the appropriate authorities. But there are no composting regulations for residential properties in this district, I said, reviewing the relevant codes. Exactly. And look at this one. Mr. Foster on Oak Avenue says someone claiming to be a waste compliance officer told him his garbage can placement was illegal and that he'd be fined if he didn't move it immediately. I shook my head in disbelief. Garbage! Can placement regulations only apply to commercial properties and multi-unit residential buildings? Single-family homes have complete discretion over placement as long as they're not blocking public walkways. Carmen was already making notes in her official inspection pad. So we have multiple instances of someone impersonating city officials, providing false information about municipal regulations, harassing residents, and conducting unauthorized surveillance of public facilities. And yesterday, that pattern of behavior escalated to physical assault. We approached Karen's house, a large colonial-style home that was meticulously maintained, but somehow felt imposing rather than welcoming. The lawn was perfect, the landscaping was precise, and multiple signs were posted around the property, warning about everything from solicitors to pet waste. Karen answered the door wearing a bathrobe despite it being nearly 10 a.m., her hair disheveled and her eyes red-rimmed. She looked like she hadn't slept any better than Sarah had. "What do you want?" she said, not bothering with pleasantries when she recognized me. "Ma'am, I'm Senior Inspector Marcus Thompson, and this is Inspector Carmen Rodriguez. We're conducting an official investigation into complaints of unauthorized enforcement activities in this neighborhood." Karen's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." Carmen stepped forward, her voice professional and calm. "Ma'am, we have multiple documented complaints about someone impersonating city officials and providing false information about municipal regulations. We'd like to ask you a few questions. I don't have to talk to you without a lawyer." "You're absolutely right," I said. "This is a voluntary interview. But I should mention that impersonating a city official is a felony, and harassment of residents, based on false claims of regulatory violations, is a serious matter that could result in both criminal charges and civil liability." Karen's hand tightened on the doorframe. "I never claimed to be a city official." Carmen consulted her notes. "Ma'am, do you recall telling Mrs. Chen on Maple Street that you were a waste compliance officer conducting neighborhood inspections?" I might have said something about compliance, but I was just trying to help maintain neighborhood standards." "And did you tell Mr. Foster that his garbage can placement was illegal and that he'd be fined if he didn't comply with your instructions?" Karen's face was getting redder. "People in this neighborhood don't follow the rules. Someone has to take responsibility." "Ma'am," I said gently, "the problem is that most of the rules you've been enforcing don't actually exist. And even when regulations do exist, only authorized city officials can enforce them. But I researched everything. I spent hours reading city codes online." Carmen and I exchanged glances. This was a common problem. People would find municipal codes online, misinterpret them, and then think they understood how enforcement worked. But reading regulations and understanding their application were two very different things. "Ma'am, may we come in to discuss this further?" Carmen asked. "We'd like to help clarify which regulations actually apply to residential properties and how the enforcement process actually works." Karen hesitated, clearly torn between her desire to defend her actions and her growing realization that she might be in serious legal trouble. Finally, she stepped aside and led us into her living room. The inside of Karen's house was as meticulously organized as the outside, but what caught my attention immediately were the stacks of printed documents covering her dining room table. As we sat down in her living room, I could see dozens of pages of city codes, environmental regulations, and what appeared to be complaint forms she'd created herself. "Karen," I said, using her first name to try to establish a more personal connection, "can you tell us why you started monitoring compliance issues in the neighborhood?" Her composure cracked slightly, and for the first time, I saw something other than anger in her expression. Loneliness, maybe, or a desperate need to feel important. When I moved here last year, I thought I was moving to a nice, well-maintained community. But everywhere I looked, I saw people not following the rules. Trash cans in the wrong places, donations being dumped at